Just think, in about 2 or 3 more days, it is going to be January 2015. Insane. It is really, really insane. And do you know what else is insane? Patrick Bateman. How's that for a segue? Yes, as you can probably guess by the name alone, today I'm going to talk about American Psycho. Perhaps one of the best films ever made, and perhaps still is Christian Bale's shining moment as an actor, and for very good reason. This was the film that put him and his talent on the map. This was the movie that made people sit up and really take notice of this Welsh dude who could pull off a flawless New Yorker accent. It's phenomenal. Now, as for my thoughts about the novel, first and foremost, I have read it, and I would be lying if I did not find it disturbing, but here are my personal thoughts on Bret Easton Ellis. I don't care if I mispronounce your name, I still think you're a fuckhead. So with that out of the way, the reason why I love American Psycho so much is probably because why you love it. It's different, it's nothing like you've already seen, great performances, all of that. But what I love most about it is that it is an enormously welcome comedy of manners. Briefly speaking, a comedy of manners is a bit of media, be it play, book, movie, radio thing, whatever, that pokes fun at the upper class. The comedy of manners was used a lot by William Shakespeare, because William Shakespeare was one of the lowly guys. He was, one of us types. So he took absolute pleasure in mocking the upper crust society and all their ridiculous expectations, and American Psycho is no different. So I'm going to read a very brief quote that Patrick Bateman says, and a lot of you probably already know what it's going to be, but I feel it perfectly resembles what this film is all about, or rather the tone it's going for, and how it approaches the admittedly very demented characters in this movie. There is an idea of a Patrick Bateman, some kind of abstraction, but there is no real me, only an entity, my bird, something illusory. And though I can hide my cold gaze, and you can shake my hand and feel flesh gripping yours, and maybe you can even sense our lifestyles are probably comparable, I simply am not there. So Patrick Bateman says that, quote, while looking at himself in the mirror after doing his daily beauty routine, everything about this movie is about artifice and trying to achieve some sense of personal achievement, but never getting there. Everybody in this movie, obviously including Patrick Bateman, is very avaricious. They want more, they want. They're not prepared to give. And what they do give, it's only in very sort of minute and incidental amounts. As I said, everybody in this film is guilty of some sort of greed or some sort of desire to be up there, rather than being content with what they have. You have all of Patrick Bateman's business posse, in particular Timothy Bryce, who Patrick Bateman really looks upon with some sort of fondness. And then you have his wife, Evelyn, played by Reese Witherspoon. Then you have his mistress, played by Samantha Mathis, whose name escapes me, I'm sorry. And then you have the poor prostitutes in this movie that Patrick kills eventually. Obviously, prostitution was definitely not their first choice in how they wanted to get by, but you know what? Wealth is infectious. The promise of riches and living the good life, the high life without any sort of effort, is attractive to us all. Even perhaps the most sympathetic characters in this movie still have that desire to be, in the echelons of wealth and prosperity. You have Chloe Sevigny's character. She's like very, very admiring of Patrick Bateman, even though he treats her like shit most of the time. Like, she still has some sort of amorous way to look up to him, and she is absolutely enamored by how much wealth he has, and like just taken aback at how classy his apartment is. And then you have the poor homeless beggar. Now, obviously, the guy's a beggar, so of course he's going to be, needing some sort of money or currency to get by. But it just goes to show you that everyone in this movie is obsessed with the dough. They are obsessed of living with their life without minimal effort. And so, yeah, this film is all about the dangers of greed and how ridiculous it is. And in the case of Patrick Bateman, the desire to be more than what you are makes him potentially into a psychopath. Now, I'm not going to argue whether or not he did what he did, but it remains evident that he is a product of the consumerism of the 1980s. Those of you who are still too young to remember, the 80s was all about the excess. It was all about having more and more and more. There was no sort of sense of moderation. You could see that in the fashion. My God, the fashion. Oh, fuck. Sorry, I got off topic. But the whole thing with American Psycho is that it may not necessarily be the person who's psychotic, even though that's always a predisposing factor in terms of mental problems. But oftentimes, it's also, the surroundings. Nature versus nurture. That is a completely different psychological discussion that I'm not going to go into. But it is entertaining to, well, not entertaining, but it's fascinating to entertain, I should say. And it really makes you think, considering this was a period in which, greed was good. That was the thing. Greed was definitely good. To have greed meant to have ambition, to have the drive to, steamroll anybody who got in your way, and that was seen as something wonderful. So to consider that the world and the people, most importantly, were like that, and still are. They still are to this day, and it is seen as something laudable rather than something that you can condemn. And it is an attitude that, people tend to, bolster more than they do tend to discourage. It all depends on where you are, I suppose, and what culture you are, and what socio-economic status you are in. But we all dream to aspire to be more. I know I have, and I'm fairly certain you have at some point. And you know what? That's human nature. There is nothing inherently wrong with wanting more. But you've got to be prepared to know what your limits are and know that not everybody is specifically equipped to live that sort of life. And that's where moderation and balance comes in. And there is no moderation and balance in American Psycho. American Psycho is all about satirism. It is completely satirical. It is, pointing the finger. It is everything that is wrong with the upper class, and it's like highly, highly exaggerated and sort of like put forward in the screen to make you see just how stupid and comedic it really, really is. And okay, I sound bitter when I say that, but that's the thing. That's another part of human nature here, that it is normal to, be contemptuous of people who have more than you. But again, it just comes back to, knowing your strengths and your weaknesses. What's worse, not knowing your weaknesses until it's too late, or being aware of what you can't quite do right, but you are still able to work with what you can. And, over time you come to be secure within yourself. They're two very different schools of thoughts, and obviously not everybody subscribes to either one or the other. Like, you're going to have polarizing entities in both circles. Going back to the movie, oh shit, I really got off on a tangent there. American Psycho is definitely one for the ages, and it is no wonder why they have courses devoted to looking at this movie and analysing it in very sort of in-depth ways. Everybody in this movie is not only greedy, but they're having a crisis of identity. And Patrick Bateman is a prime particular of that. Now, Patrick Bateman is not supposed to be the hero, but Patrick Bateman is an example of scopophilia. There is a philosopher known as Lacan who says that scopophilia is when you are watching an image like such as a movie on the screen, you tend to gravitate towards the most energetic and most, aesthetically attractive specimen on the screen. And Patrick Bateman has some sort of joy to him. He has some sort of life, despite the fact that you are looking, or rather what Patrick Bateman tells you, you are looking at a construct, at an idea, at some sort of strange, biological, almost alchemical mimicry. Once again, that's a completely different concept, but you know what I'm getting at. So, yeah, the only reason why we're really following Patrick Bateman is that he is there. He's not an avatar of you or me. He's not particularly relatable, but this film follows his experiences. It's like Malcolm McDowell with A Clockwork Orange. Malcolm McDowell's Alex Delange is a fucking monster, okay? Really, there's nothing morally good about him. But the film insists on showing you, insists on showing you life through his lens, and, you know, you become used to it. Patrick Bateman is another example of that. Even if you don't like him, he is the only means for you to sort of, you know, latch on to the movie and go with it from there. So, I'm not really going to go into the whole sort of pop cultural angle of American Psycho, but once again, back in the 80s, it was all about excess. It was all about just, I want more, And that's another thing. Artistry in this film is not looked at with some sort of personal artistic integrity. Patrick Bateman likes Huey Lewis and the News and Phil Collins and Whitney Houston just because the music itself is popular. He doesn't give any sort of real indication that he is personally invested in these particular songs by these particular bands and entertainment figures. No, he only likes these things because other people like them. Now, he also states that he loves Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and you see him watch the film multiple times throughout the movie. Well, he's not necessarily watching it, but it's going on in the background while he's doing something else. But again, that may denote that he doesn't necessarily appreciate the films on a personal level. Well, beyond the fact that Leatherface is probably Patrick Bateman, just more well-dressed and not from a backwards family. But he's not especially paying attention to it on its own merits. So, yeah, American Psycho is definitely a film that remains relevant even to this day. It's been out for about 14 years. 14 years of relevance, and that's when you know a film is able to stick with the public consciousness and it is able to influence and still remain, you know, discussed by people and movie fans the world over. It's a great movie. So I would give American Psycho a 5 out of 5. And I mean that without any some sort of, you know, irony or, you know, popular opinion. Well, here's the thing, with popular opinion, I tend to generally agree with it, but I prefer to I prefer to sit down and watch a movie and judge for myself. And I know I definitely have not covered what all of American Psycho is all about, but that's something that is left up to everybody to sort of like sit down and think for themselves about it, or even better, sit down in a group and discuss it and look at it and tear it apart and see why they love it so much. I find, like, when you're talking to a friend, you're able to bounce back and forth all these different things. Like, I remember sitting down and discussing this movie with my friend Mel, and she gave me, like, a lot of valuable insight that I hadn't even considered to that point about this movie. And it really, again, shaped my perspective of the film. Once again, it's just a really great, wonderful film that will just live on in the annals of film history. And you know what? It ain't going anywhere. And thank heavens for that. So, yes, that was my little rant and review of American Psycho, and I thank you once again for tuning in, and I hope you have a very safe and happy New Year. You take care of yourselves and each other. Bye-bye.